Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to another Premier Pundits podcast. Of course, it's Monday, and of course, I'm joined by the fantasy doc himself, Raj Brar from 3CB Performance. It's been another busy weekend, Raj, but how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Thankfully, mine wasn't too busy, but certainly yet another very, very busy game week.
Yeah, I mean, following from afar, but you cannot help but notice all of the gossip and the chatter has been around one person this weekend, Jack Grealish. Yeah, he's been hitting the headlines, and there's a couple of different facets to this story that I want to talk about. First and foremost, we'll touch upon his injury and what we know, and potentially when we can hopefully maybe look to see him back in that lineup for Aston Villa. Obviously, he's a pivotal player for them. I'll give you a little bit of background, and for those who maybe haven't read or have been locked away in a cave somewhere on the other side of the earth with no Wi-Fi. But yeah, stories broke on Friday initially, late Friday evening, suggesting that Jack had suffered some kind of shin injury that was going to keep him out for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, potentially longer. We heard from some quarters. There was no official announcement. There was very little out there in terms of media outlet coverage. And it wasn't until that team news broke on Sunday afternoon over here in the UK that we found out, that Jack Grealish was actually omitted from that starting 11 and indeed the matchday squad. Dean Smith come out and almost he played down what we'd all been fearing, like this suggestion that he had a previous injury, a fracture of the tib, a few years back that kept him out for a while. And then there was some suggestion that it was shin splints and it maybe could be 2 months and then 3 months. And then Dean Smith comes out and says, look, it's certainly not long term. It's nothing serious. He felt a little bit discomfort in training, so we pulled him out. And knowing Jack, we'll know he'll want to be back as soon as possible. And we're still hopeful that he could, be available for the game against Leeds, which is the double game week in 26. Now, Dean Smith gets a lot of flack from the community for those comments, and going against maybe the grain of what the general sort of media consensus has been. I mean, do you think that news is he being singled out unfairly, or do you think, given what we know with this type of injury or what's going on with Jack, do you think maybe a return for that double game week is actually realistic?
I think it is a bit unfair just because we don't know exactly what's going on. So, even if it is, let's assume it is shin splints or what's called MTSS, medial tibial or shin bone stress syndrome, that's really more of an issue of pain management. And can you manage that, right? With hands-on, with ice, with some rest in between, more treatment sessions and rest between training, maybe reducing some of that load. And so until we know that severity, I think it's a bit premature to say how some of these outlets have reported 4 to 6 weeks. That to me looks like someone went on WebMD and looked up shin splints and said, oh, there we go, 4 to 6 weeks, right? That's what it looks like. Rather than saying, okay, this is what the player's dealing with. If he's having slight discomfort, on this, and I deal with these all the time, especially with runners who put in a lot of work with footballers, on hard surfaces, it tends to lead to some of these issues. And it really just comes down to what he's feeling and the severity of it, which we don't know.
And you touched upon it just there, Raj. One of your first thoughts, or the first thing that sprang to mind, I cast my mind back to the beginning of January, when Bodymore Heath was closed down, and players were required to self-isolate. Jack was fairly active on social media, providing updates from his home gym, from wherever. Would that, change of environment, change of surface, the intensity of maybe having to work his way back up to match fitness, plus that glut of games, could that have been a major contributing factor to this condition and why maybe he was pulled from training on Friday?
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those parts are factors that you look at, especially for an overuse injury, especially for shin splints. We don't really know, was he doing more treadmill work? What type of surface is he running on? What type of shoes is he wearing relative to what he's used to, right? There's all those variables that are common variables that come into play for a footballer who develops shin splints.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, look, it's obviously not great news, but potentially not as bad as some of the media outlets are certainly painting at this moment in time. Good news there on the fantasy front, but maybe a slight concern heading into that double game week. Even if Jack is available for one, whether he would be able to start 2 games in quick succession would be the worry. Now, and we've just had a breaking story actually, as we've just before we've come on. It's now Monday evening across here in the UK. Dean Smith was apparently apoplectic with the fact that this news broke before there was a leak. As the instant assumption was that there was a leak from the Villa training ground and what happened. However, further investigation suggests that one of our own within the fantasy community, quite an astute guy, learned that one or two of the Aston Villa players learned their teams and found out that 3 of those, plus a member of the backroom staff, one of their performance analysts, all transferred out Jack Grealish ahead of game week 25. And he done the maths and he put 2 and 2 together and came out with 4 as it happened. If they're transferring out, there must be a concern. And for that reason, now Dean Smith's come out and he said, that's it. As far as I'm concerned, there is no fantasy football allowed within any of the players, anybody associated with the club whatsoever. It stops, and it stops now because people are maybe getting that little bit of insight, which it gives an unfair advantage. Being stateside and being involved in fantasy sports across there, is that something that you've ever experienced or come across in the US? And your many years of playing the game.
Yeah, in my 20 plus years, I've never heard of that, and so it's first off, hats off to whoever caught that, which is pretty impressive in the first place. But yeah, I mean, when I heard about that, I was, but it makes sense if you're able to have access to players' lineups, it gives you more information. And I can certainly understand the response as well, because we know that information is very valuable to teams about who's going to play, who's not going to play, and you want to be able to handle that information. And it's just an interesting, kind of unique paradigm right now, especially in the UK with fantasy football just really exploding. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens either for other Premier League teams, or if there's something comes down across the FA or whatever it is about how players can be involved, especially let's say if there's money involved in some of these things, right? And then that can become a whole different topic.
Yeah, I agree. I think it could be carte blanche across the league after this. I think that sets a precedent. I mean, just touching upon obviously that you haven't experienced that before. Is that because across in US fantasy sports there's a lot more transparency with regards to those players who picked up injuries and aren't able to make a game day, for example?
Yeah, so let's use the biggest example, like the NFL, National Football, American Football League. They have designations that they have to put on players: doubtful, questionable, probable. And so it gives you insight into that player. It's not just the manager talking about it, which a lot of times you cannot trust, or you're trying to hear things. They actually have league mandated rules that you have to put on that player to provide information. Now, they don't have to tell you much details on that, but it still gives you a little bit more probabilities about what's going on with that player.
And are those, I suppose, player statuses, are those still open to interpretation, or are the league fairly rigid in their rules and ensuring that whatever you put down has to sort of, at least mirror what's really happening down there at the coalface?
I mean, they're relatively uniform. Of course, you'll have those outlier cases where you'll have someone go, from doubtful all week, and then on game day they're suddenly playing or whatever it is. But it could be because there's a muscular injury, which, as we know, can evolve even overnight. But for the most part, yeah, those statuses are pretty uniform, and so it gives you more information, gives you more reliable information compared to what we deal with in the Premier League, where it's me and you trying to interpret things.
I mean, the obvious question I'm going to ask is, from us working, day to day in this type of, environment and trying to look at these injuries. I mean, would you like to see the Premier League adopt a more, uniform approach to injury management and discussion and disclosure, as Steve said, or do you like that sort of air of anonymity and that, those question marks that can, crop up at the last moment to keep things interesting and keep us on our toes?
I would like some, it doesn't have to be at the level of what we see in the NFL or other leagues, but I would like to see some standardization of it, just because it makes it easier to understand what's going on. And I think, honestly, a lot of times it's unfair to the players because the fans don't understand what's going on. And so they have these expectations, or even the managers, right? You have these expectations where you're saying, oh, we're doubtful the player will play, or they might play. And so fans get their hopes up or down. And then when that player plays or doesn't play, there's that huge let off, or that huge, hopes go up either way. And so I would love to see it more so from that perspective.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, I don't want it just to be the Jack Grealish show. So I'm going to, again, revert back to my hometown club, and Callum Wilson. We're hovering precariously close to the drop zone. Callum Wilson is, our jewel in the crown. He suffered a hamstring strain, grade 1, potentially grade 2. Initial timeline was 6 to 8 weeks. We're now sort of 2 and a bit weeks post-injury. And he's just released a video on Instagram, giving a little bit of an update on where he's at. Are we able to take anything from those videos? Have we got any hope, Raj, of a quick and an early return? Please help.
Well, not to burst the bubble, but nothing looks to be that far ahead of schedule. It looks to be quite normal on that return. Now, as we just discussed with muscle injuries, things can evolve quickly. And so, but when you're early on, what he's doing looks relatively standard. There's no dynamic work, change of direction work, no high speed, high intensity work. And so I think we'll know more typically around the 4-week mark rather than this early on.
So basically we're stuck with Dwight Gale and Joe Linton for the foreseeable future.
Correct.
Heaven help us, Raj. Heaven help us. Listen, as always, my friend, it's been absolutely fantastic. I do love these Monday roundups of the weekend. And yeah, we look forward to having you on again soon. If you're not following Raj on Twitter or YouTube, why not? You should. At 3CB Performance. He's a top man. And it's not just injury, he does loads of analysis. I watched your video, by the way, on Mbappe and Haaland in the sprinting. Fantastic, Raj. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, check that out. But for now, that's all, folks. See you soon.